Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with etrailer, and today I'm going to be showing you how to install the Airlift WirelessAIR air compressor system for air helper springs here on our 2023 Ram 2500. If you've installed air springs on your Ram 2500 and you don't feel like lugging around that air compressor and having to haul all this extra hose and maybe an extension cord, so that way when you're out at whatever job site you're at, you can actually plug in and air up your air springs, then having an onboard compressor is going to be the top item for you. With this specific one that we installed on our neighbor's truck today, it has a dual path manifold on it, so that's going to allow him to adjust the air pressure in each air spring separately. And that is typically not what most people are going to get, just because most people will go with the single path, air both up and down evenly. And that's good for when you're just hauling around maybe a trailer or even loads inside of the bed. Now, when you have heavier offset loads, where maybe you have a toolbox where all of your heavy stuff's on one side and it's really starting to lean more on one side of your suspension, then going with that dual path will allow you to correct that unevenness between the two air springs by just adding a little bit more PSI into that separate bag that's getting more weight on it. This compressor is going to allow you to air up your air springs from 5 PSI all the way up to 100 PSI, so you can get that full load capacity out of them. And it has a easy mount design, so our compressor, our manifold, it's all on this bracket already ready to go for you, and it's going to come with a U-bolt. And if your frame rail is 7.5 inches up to 8.5 inches tall, you'll be able to use that U-bolt and easily just clamp on this bracket, so everything's mounted up nice and quickly. This air compressor is going to come with a remote, which is going to have 3 presets on it. One thing I like to do is just set that first preset at 5 PSI, so that way you just have it real easy. You can drop right back down to 5 PSI when you're done hauling stuff around without having to sit there and click it down a whole bunch. Another thing with this is it's going to tell you exactly what your PSI is at in either air spring, so you can sit there and monitor it. If you are suspecting that there's a leak, then you could just sit here and kind of keep an eye on it and see if that PSI starts to drop in either bag. Now the other thing with this is what if my battery's dead in my remote or I lose it, then they have a backup for you. It's going to be your smartphone. You can download their app and be able to control and monitor your air springs and the air compressor. And that's also going to give you some diagnostics as well. So if you're ever having an issue with your air spring, you can log into that app and see what kind of error code it's giving you so that you can correct the problem. Now, since this is tied into the ignition with a fuse tap, which was not included with the kit, so I highly recommend purchasing one before you check out fully. That is going to prevent the compressor from kicking on just at any time. So you have to have the vehicle running for the compressor to air up. You can still air down while the vehicle's off, so you can let that go and it will have power just to do that, but it's not going to sit there and just drain your battery. So say in the middle of the night you had a leak that you didn't catch, and then it's just sitting there running the compressor over and over and over again trying to fix that leak. That's not going to be possible now just because we are tied into the ignition. So it's going to keep your battery safe, so that way you don't come out and find out, oh hey, now I got a dead battery, now I have an even bigger problem to deal with on top of having a leak in my air spring system. Since this does come with an easy mount bracket, the installation is fairly simple. This is definitely something you could do at home. The hardest part really is just routing your airline tubing over to the air springs and then your wiring up to the engine compartment, so you can avoid any kind of moving parts, anything that's going to be generating heat. So in my case, when I was running it, the exhaust is running all the way down the frame rail on our passenger side, so I had to kind of cut everything over to the driver's side and then run it forward. So it honestly still super simple. Really the big difference here might just be your submodel might have a few variations compared to how ours was, so you might need to make some minor adjustments, but like I said, the big thing here is just staying away from anything that could damage the wiring or the airline tubes. Now, if this is something you don't feel comfortable doing, or you just don't have the time to do it, please feel free to use our dealer locator. You can enter in your zip code and find a shop to get it professionally installed. If you are planning on doing this yourself, then stick around and I'll walk you through the process. So to begin our installation, we need to figure out where we want to mount our compressor. Now there's 2 ways that you're not allowed to mount this. So we don't want our connector on our manifold facing down, and we also don't want it facing down in this orientation. So like if you put it on the bottom of the frame rail, not allowed. They don't want that. You're going to probably end up smacking it and damaging it. So the way I'm going to be doing this is with the connection point for our wire harness facing up, as well as the two for our air tubes. So if you look real closely, they have a 1 and a 2 on here, with 1 being our driver's side, 2 being our passengers. So when you're adding in those air lines, make sure that you're routing them correctly. Otherwise, when you're using the remote and you are trying to fill up one thinking it's the driver's side, it's going to be filling up the wrong side for you. Now, typically when it comes to the wire harness, we're going to ground through the frame with our ground wire and then just run it with that ring terminal that's on there. In this case, our wire harness actually came with 2 wires for power and ground, so we're just going to use some heat shrink butt connectors and splice it on that way, and then just pop in our airline tubing. So with all that said, I'm going to hop under here and we will get that mount in place and start making our connections. So easiest way to do this, slide it up sideways, get it around that wire harness there, and now we have it around our frame. Next, get our top holes in, and that one, and I was going to butt it right up against this body mount bracket here. And just so this doesn't fall off on us, let's throw on a flat washer and a lock nut. Now, as you tighten these down, make sure you're doing them evenly. You don't want to have it pressing too much on one side and then you got your compressor, sort of tilted out. So I'm going to just run this down until it's just touching and then do the top. And now that we have that in place, I just taped all my wiring up here. So we're going to press on this connector, and then it has this little white tab we'll pop in to lock it in place. I'll get that set up on here. Need to turn my wiring around. There we go. And then on the harness, it's got a power and ground wire. So we're gonna strip back the casing just a bit. And I've got 2 heat shrink butt connectors. They give you 2 in your kit. One you're gonna be using for the fuse holder when you get to the battery. Honestly, I wasn't too impressed with the heat shrink butt connectors that they gave us in the kit. I actually had one kind of fail on me, so I'm switching to the ones that we just typically use here at eTrailer, just so I know I don't have to worry about it later on down the road. And then those are going to match up with our wires on our coming out of our manifold and compressor. That crimp down. All right, now I'm going to come back with my heat gun and we'll get that all shrunk down, but before I do so, I'm going to grab my airlines that I just used some painter's tape and popped on here, and making sure that I'm putting them in the correct holes here. The one on my right here should be 1, and now it's going to be running to my driver's side. And this other one is 2, and that's for our passenger. So I've already put the air filter in, but just to kind of go over what you're going to do, this fitting that's going to screw onto the air filter isn't already on it. It'll be in a separate little bag. Just thread that on. You don't have to go super tight because remember, this is plastic, and it's not like it has to be airtight just because it has an opening to allow air to flow through. So what I like to do is I like to find like a hat channel, usually on the bed, but luckily on this Ram we were able to find one on the cab side. So it's right above our compressor, so it makes it a nice, easy connection point right here. And I'll just take a 3/8 drill bit, drill into the channel, pop this in, and at 3/8, that's pretty good to hold it nice and tight. I mean, you can kind of twist it around, but you ain't pulling it out. And then I love to face it down, so that way you can take out the 2 screws, pop the filter out, and replace the filter if needed. The big thing here is that you don't want this to get wet, so it needs to be up and kind of hidden away so that way water's not splashing it. And then with the airline tubing, it's going to be that real shiny 1/4 inch airline tubing that's included in your kit. We're gonna pop that onto our compressor right here at the back. And I'm gonna put it so it's looped up with this holding it, since that'll be our lowest point. That just slides right onto the barbed fitting. And then we'll run it straight up. I'm gonna cut it off right about there. And when you're cutting any kind of airline tubing, you wanna make sure you get a nice, sharp, clean cut. And you want it to be 90 degrees. If you're off even a little bit, you can end up having a little bit of space where it allows a leak to pass through. So it's good to make sure that you are using the right style cutter. Don't use scissors. We sell airline tubing cutters here as well for pretty cheap. So you can pick one of those little guys up and add that to your tool collection. Now from our compressor, we can run our air tubing over to our air springs. You will want to make sure that number 1 on the manifold is going over to the driver's side and number 2 is going to the passenger side. And with that, we're going to also need a T to make our connections into our existing lines, but that's not going to be included with your kit, so you'll want to pick up one separately. So for our electrical, I was really trying to keep this away from the exhaust, so I shot straight up and I came over just a little bit to get behind this cross beam here. And then I'm zip tying, I'm just running right across, get over the gas tank, and then we pop out right over here, right about midway up the gas tank here. And I'm just following the frame rail, sticking it behind any body mounts that I can. And then once we get up to the driver's side wheel well, there's a bunch of wiring. I just traced it right up that, and I stuck my fish stick down, taped it to it, and pulled it right up into the engine compartment where you can see it right by the battery and the fuse box. So super simple to do on this vehicle. Really not a lot of challenges aside from just making sure that you get away from the exhaust. So I would not run it down the frame rail on the passenger side. I started to and then realized I wasn't gonna have a good way to make it across without being right next to the exhaust. So like I did with the, just coming straight across right at the compressor is probably gonna be your best bet. So now that we have all of our wiring up here, I've already kind of started to get it where I need to, basically. So we'll start with our power wire here. I've got this coming up. I am going to trim it down, but I wanted to wait until we were a little bit closer. So I have my fuse holder, which is going to need to go on my power wire and then connect to our battery. So they give you a couple of heat shrink butt connectors. We're going to put one on one side of our fuse holder and a ring terminal on the other. The way that this sat pretty natural is like right in between there, so that's going to help hold it up. So I'm going to run my wire just like so. I'm going to snip off that excess there, have this sit here, and then this is going to run up and connect to our battery. Now for the ground, there's a ground post right here, and I've got my ground wire sitting here. Since I already snipped it down to length, I put the ring terminal on so I wouldn't lose it. And that's just going to pop right on once we take that nut off. And then we'll replace that nut, and then we'll be grounded to the frame. And the last wire here is going to be that pink one, which has fallen down a little bit. Let me grab that out. And this is going to need to run to a fuse that's tied to our ignition. So the fuse that only has power whenever the ignition is on. And I've chosen the trailer camera fuse. It's going to be a 10 amp fuse. It's going to sit right there. And I've picked up a fuse tap, which is not included with your kit. We're going to put that 10 that we took out at the bottom, and then the top hole is rated for 5 amps. This isn't going to pull more than 5 amps. It's only just sense that there's ignition, and then it'll turn on. And one other thing I had to do so that I wouldn't crush my wire is I notched out the box just a little bit, so that way when my pink wire comes in and I butt connector it to that fuse tap, I can still close the lid without having any issues. And that's going to help also keep everything protected from any kind of water, just in case it gets in the engine compartment. So with that being said, we'll trim off what we need here. Say right about there. We'll leave a little bit of excess. Strip back our casing. Once you have that crimped down, make sure you give it a little tug. Make sure it ain't going anywhere. Then we can push that down the rest of the way and close up our fuse box. Now, like I said over on the battery, we'll Need to trim a bit off for the fuse holder. Butt connector. Crimp that down. And now that we have everything ran, all of it's connected, we've got our airline tubing all in, I'm going to go ahead and put in my 15 amp fuse into my fuse holder, and then we can start our vehicle. Going in straight. There we go. Which you can hear it powering on already. It's not actually going to activate until we turn the vehicle on, so I'm going to start the car, and we'll start pairing up our remote. Pairing up the remote is kind of hit or miss. Typically takes a couple tries. You have to sit there and hit pair. Definitely a good idea to just go right by the compressor with your remote and make it a lot easier for the two to communicate. And one thing I found is if I put it kind of up above the compressor, for some reason that ends up letting it sync a little bit faster. So it's already starting to scan for it. I'm gonna get the car running and we'll be right over there trying to pair. Yeah, so it already found it. We can hit OK, or the center button. Pairing already successful, so super simple. And you can see it's got the two different options here. So it's at 5 for both right now just to start with. We're gonna boost that up to 50 and then do a leak test. Oh, a little bit too much. All right, now with our air compressor installed and our air lines ran, we can spray them down with some soapy water and check each of our connections for leaks. Well, that'll do it for our look at and installation of the Airlift WirelessAIR air compressor system for air helper springs here on our 2023 Ram 2500. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about which compressor system is going to be the right fit for your Ram 2500, please feel free to contact us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.